Of course Kanvar didn't want either his father or grandfather dead, but he clamped his mouth shut and said nothing. His sweat-soaked body ached from the fever. His heart throbbed as if beating had become a hideous chore. Though he forced himself to breathe, his lungs burned like he was drowning. At least the sharp pain in his leg was gone. He dropped his gaze from his father's angry eyes to stare at the rapidly healing wound on his leg. No wonder it was so hard to kill a great dragon. They could heal themselves so fast. But all things couldn't be healed with the lick of a tongue. Kanvar had adored his grandfather Rasa and been torn up inside when he went away never to return. Even though Kanvar now understood why, it didn't make him miss his grandfather any less. Kanvar tried not to think about that. He didn't like the wall his father had put around his mind, and he was glad to have a little of Dar-Anadhar's presence slip through. He sensed the great blue dragon curled up in a cavern somewhere at the base of the cliffs. A breeze, heavy with moist air, swirled through the room. Except for the wind, the room was silent. Kanvar had gotten used to the constant throb of noise from the jungle. Even in the colony behind its rock walls, the screech of the birds and chatter of the monkeys could be heard night and day. But this high up the cliff, up higher than the vegetation and animals, everything stilled to silence. His father continued to stand angrily over him. Kanvar refused to look up or speak. Chills took him again, and he started shivering. He hated it. He must look so pathetic to his father. Too weak. Too empty and alone. Dying. He could feel it now with every feeble beat of his heart. His chest itched and burned. He tried scratching it, but that only made the itch worse. His father let out a hiss. "You can't have a rash so soon." Kanvar scratched his chest. "Don't do that," his father said. "Parmvar," he yelled with his mind. Kanvar winced at the loud yell. "Sorry," his father said. "I've never seen anything like this. It's even spreading onto your arms. Moving so fast. We haven't much time." "But Raj." "Never mind. I need to go help him. There has to be someone." An ancient man hurried into the room. "Thank the fountain," his father said. "Kanvar, this is Parmvar. He's been helping young Nagas through the bonding process since before Stonefountain fell. I have to go." He started for the door, but Parmvar grabbed his arm. "How long has the boy had this rash? Why didn't you call me sooner?" Parmvar asked. "I called you as soon as I saw it. As far as I know, he's only had it for a few minutes. He just started scratching." Amar pulled away and hurried out of the room. Parmvar's eyes widened in surprise. Kanvar bit his lip and concentrated on breathing. It seemed so hard now, he wondered how he'd done it all of his life. "Steady there." Parmvar pressed a gnarled hand against Kanvar's chest. Kanvar sucked in a ragged breath. "I don't want to die. I will not die. That's the spirit." Parmvar examined the healed wound on Kanvar's leg. "You've exchanged blood with some dragon already, haven't you?" Parmvar said, his voice soft and steady. Kanvar nodded. "I was holding my father's sword when Dar-Anadhar grabbed me. It cut both of us while he flew. I could feel him, hurt and angry. I could hear his voice until my father cut me off from him." Kanvar shuddered. It felt like dying, losing track of his mind like that. Parmvar sighed. "Does your father know your blood mixed with Dar-Anadhar's blood in the wound?" "No. He was mad enough when he thought Dar-Anadhar's blood had simply splashed on me when I stabbed him in the eye. I didn't dare tell him the rest." Parmvar's brow wrinkled in concern. "His good eye?" he asked slowly. A deep shiver racked Kanvar for a moment before he could respond. "Yes. He's not very happy with me." Parmvar chuckled. "I imagine not. Rest for a minute now. The fever and rash have come on you quickly because you've done more than just touch dragon blood. You've got a partial bond with the Great Blue. One that will be difficult to break, I fear." "Adi," Parmvar called. A boy about Kanvar's age darted into the room. He had the gray skin and dark hair of a villager. "Adi," Parmvar said. "Please go find His Majesty and tell him I need to speak with him privately before the choosing ceremony." Adi nodded and ran off again. Kanvar heard his running steps echo down the hall. "Is your mind still shielded from Dar-Anadhar's?" Parmvar asked. "Mostly." The dark wall his father had built around his mind still terrified him. He pressed at it in a futile attempt to escape. "Easy there," Parmvar said. "It seems your father was a bit heavy-handed with that. But then finesse was never his strong point. I'll get him to take the shield down as soon as I teach you how to make one of your own." Please hurry," Kanvar said. "As fast as I can," Parmvar reassured him. He crossed the room to the bookshelf and came back with a heavy volume whose leather cover was cracked and brittle with age. The pages had yellowed almost as dark as the leather cover. "I think that shield is accelerating the dragon sickness, but some things can't be learned in a matter of seconds. This might take you a little while. What is the choosing ceremony? Kanvar asked. Where has my father gone? What's going on? That's what I'm trying to teach you, my boy. Just hold on a second longer. Kanvar thumbed through a couple more pages and then stopped. Can you read? Yes, of course, Kanvar said. Kanvar turned the book so Kanvar could see the page he'd opened to. It showed a young gold dragon with its head down level with a boy who rested his hand on the dragonstone in its forehead. There were words below the picture in a thin spidery handwriting, but Kanvar didn't recognize them. I know how to read, but those aren't real words, Kanvar said. Kanvar turned the book back to himself and frowned at the page. Has the language changed so much in the last 1,000 years? I suppose it has. You can't really be 1,000 years old, Kanvar said. I mean, my father was just exaggerating, right? You couldn't have been around before Stonefountain fell? Kanvar glanced at Kanvar and then laid the book aside. I don't know how I'm supposed to teach you years worth of history, lore and skills in such a short time. I should have started instructing you from the time you were very young like I have with Adi. There is the slight chance that he might be a Naga. He has displayed some mental abilities and affinity for the dragons. I've been teaching him since he was 6 and expect the fever to come upon him soon. But with you there is so much you must learn before you bond in such a short time, I can hardly think where to start. You're talking your way around my question without answering me, Kanvar interrupted. Were you really at Stonefountain? It fell 1,000 years ago. Kanvar rubbed his wrinkled face. He did look ancient. Yes, I was at Stonefountain. King Khalid was a good friend of mine. We grew up together. Learned from the same tutors. He, of course, became king, and I went into the study of plants and their alchemical properties. I split my time between Stonefountain and here. I have a laboratory in a cavern in the cliffs beneath the castle. In truth, I was not helping youngsters bond at that time. That duty was left to my elders and betters. Kanvar's mind drifted and he had trouble focusing on Kanvar's words. Instead, Kanvar's memories became his own as if Kanvar had been there all those years before in Kanvar's place. He stood in a large cavern with walls lined with glowing stones. A rainbow of pastels that flickered with a life of their own and sang. Yes, the rocks sang, a chorus of thousands of voices blended in harmony, spinning out a musical refrain so sweet it brought tears to his eyes. There was power in the music, in the stones, and in a huge fountain of water that bubbled up from the rocks at the center of the cavern. The power surged through him, permeating his soul until he glowed and sang with the rocks and flowed with the water out of the cavern, cascading down the side of a mountain with its golden palace. Hall after mighty hall rose up around the mountain slopes in splendor, adorned in gold and flashing jewels. The water lit the palace as it fell down and flowed into a great river that passed grand houses. The great buildings gave way to streets lined with smaller buildings. The river moved on from there to streets of adobe much like Darrow, though the farther it went, the smaller the houses became, soon falling away to huts of stick and mud, crowded among rotting canvas tents. And people, hungry and dirty, lined the streets, hands hanging down, bellies swollen in starvation, and they looked up at the mighty palace with hopeless fear and anger. But the river moved on, out through fields of rice and wheat where great gold dragons oversaw ragged laborers working the soil. Great blue dragons in chains pulling the plows. And Kanvar felt the dragon's anger and the people's desperation. And he heard the thoughts of those who would rebel, but they were whipped into silence. Kanvar found himself flying with Kanvar's memories on the back of a gold dragon, away from the horrors of the city, far across the water where he could work with his plants and potions in peace. Where he could search for cures to ease sickness and make people's life better. Only to return to Stonefountain again with tinctures and tonics. Most of them taken immediately by the Nagas who lived in the Golden Palace. Khalid. Kanvar faced the Golden King in a private chamber. Your men have taken almost all of my medicines. I made this batch for those in the city. The coughing sickness has come there. Thousands could die if it goes unchecked. Please, tell them to return my remedies to me. I can stop this sickness before it spreads. Kanvar. Khalid's golden crown flashed in the sunlight from the window. There are hundreds of children born a day out there. And so very few born here even in a decade, and half of those have deformities and have to be discarded. We must use your medicines to protect our own. This entire civilization would crumble without us. Kanvar clenched his fists. He could hardly contain his anger in the presence of the king and had to work hard to keep his thoughts shielded where the king couldn't hear them. The babies are born deformed because you continue to intermarry only among the Nagas. You must stop this practice. Bring in new blood. And by the fountain, give me back my medicines for the people. You are their king. You should care what happens to them. If you do not treat them justly, they will rebel against you. Khalid's face turned red, and he pounded his fist on a golden pillar. They dare not rebel. They cannot. I know all of their thoughts. We control their very minds if we must. There will be no rebellion. Our powers are too strong. As you say. Kanvar kept his mind firmly shielded from his old friend. Friend no more, perhaps. The power of kingship had twisted him into something Kanvar no longer recognized. He left the palace and went out into the hopeless city. He had one vial of the tincture left. He may be able to save one person. A ragged and desperate man saw him in the street, came over, and fell to his knees before Kanvar. Mighty One, please help us. My daughter is sick with a cough. I have heard that you have found a cure. Please, save us. I'll give you anything. Kanvar knelt in the dirt and put a hand on the man's shoulder. You have nothing of worth to give me. It didn't matter. He would help this man anyway. Oh, but I do. I was given this just this morning, the man spluttered. It's very pretty. Surely it would be worth my daughter's life. He reached into a grubby pocket and pulled out a little iron box. When he opened it, a searing dagger of music stabbed Kanvar's mind. Looking past the pain, he saw a glowing blue stone in the box. It had to come from the walls of Stonefountain. And the song, instead of beautifully in tune with the other rocks of the cavern, was piercing in a desperate cry of pain. The stone screamed at being separated from the others of the fountain. Kanvar reached out and snapped the lid shut. The stone fell silent, trapped in the iron box. Who gave you this? Kanvar demanded. The man's eyes widened in sudden fear. He leapt to his feet and tried to run, but Kanvar caught him and pried the box from the man's shaking hands. In its place he gave the man the only vial of medicine he'd been allowed to keep. One dose to protect himself from the sickness. He gave it to the man. For your daughter, he said. Then he let the man go, and never saw him again. Fear pounding in Kanvar's chest. He summoned his dragon and flew back to the mountain. Dismounting, he walked deep into the mountain's heart where the fountain spewed up. As he stepped into the cavern, he was overcome by a twisted scream of voices. The glorious song had been shattered. The fountain cried in pain. Kanvar cast his eyes to the walls and saw jagged claw marks and thousands of empty black sockets where the glowing stones had been torn out by some dragon and carried off. The great song was broken. Almost blinded by the pain of the shattered song, Kanvar stumbled away from the fountain and out into the fading light. His stomach churned with revulsion as he looked down at the little iron box. And he realized he had not been able to hear his dragon's voice or feel his dragon's mind the whole time he'd been in the cave. His dragon, Saren, leaned down, keening just above his head. Trembling with fear, Kanvar opened the box. The stone screamed. His mind lost contact with the dragon standing beside him. By the fountain, he swore. Do you know what this means, Saren? The people can rise up in rebellion and Khalid will never know it's coming. The stones will hide their thoughts. We will be powerless. He closed the box and raced to Khalid's chambers, but was stopped by the royal guard before he could enter. His Majesty is through talking with you, Kanvar, the guard said. We have strict orders that you are to leave him alone. But this is important, Kanvar protested. I have to warn him. There is terrible danger. Please. He tried to push past, but the guards grabbed him and dragged him away. In shock he saw that one of the guards carried a small iron box tucked in his sash. Khalid, he called, seeking his old friend's mind. But Khalid's mind was locked away from him with heavy shields. Kanvar stumbled away from the guards and raced to a window overlooking the city. He saw shadows moving in the streets, a mob gathering in the falling darkness. He had to do something. Thousands of stones were gone, spread among the poorest of the people, given to those who were the most desperate, put into the hands of the palace guards. The fountain song was broken, and with it the power that created their civilization. All is lost, he moaned. Not all, Saren said. Perhaps we can save one person. Like the daughter of the man you gave the medicine to. Go get the king's son and meet me back here. Saren took flight from the window. And Kanvar ran. The vague thought that it would be treason to abduct the king's son made little impression on him. He raced to the nursery and snatched the 5-year-old child from his bed, ignoring the surprised protest of the nurse who looked after him. Saren met Kanvar back at the window, carrying a squirming wormling, the great dragon king's newest hatchling. Saren's mate hovered beside him. Kanvar leapt up onto Saren's neck, and they took flight, swiftly, silently, away from the city. In the darkness behind him, Kanvar heard the sudden scream of thousands of tortured stones taken from their iron prisons. Kanvar's memories pulled from Kanvar's mind. Kanvar looked up to see tears in the old man's eyes. Well, I hadn't meant to share that information with you in exactly that fashion, though I suppose it works well enough. Training you to control your powers is most definitely at the top of my list. Kanvar pulled out a gold handkerchief and dried his eyes. So, yes, I was at Stonefountain, and if I hadn't rescued your grandfather, perhaps no Nagas would have survived at all. But how could you have lived all this time? Kanvar asked. His heart was still beating fast from the terror of Parmvar's memories. He'd known about the singing stones all his life, but hadn't realized it was them that had made the revolution at Stonefountain possible. Kanvar could hardly believe how cruel King Khalid had been. No wonder the Varnans would let no king rule over them. Jadi leaders were voted on by the members, and then those leaders sat together on the All Council. The Merinis voted directly for their senate and minister, which led their country. No kings. And yet, here in Kundiland, a king still existed. An heir to the throne of Stonefountain. As powerful a Naga as King Khalid had been. And that man was Kanvar's father. Parmvar picked up the book he'd brought over from the shelf. I had intended to let you read this while I went to speak with your father. I guess I'll have to give you a brief overview instead. I am over 1,000 years old because my dragon is that old. After you bond with a dragon, you will age at the same rate as him. But my dragon and I are very old. Few live this long. I counted up to the fresh jungle air along with a few medicines and tinctures I administered to myself as needed. He winked at Kanvar. But how long I have lived is not the issue here. It is seeing that you live a good long life. He pointed to the picture of the boy and the dragon in the book. Their Majesties, your father and Raja Hansa, have gone to look for gold dragons that they think will be compatible with you. They will bring those young ones here to meet you during the choosing ceremony. You will touch each of their stones, which will allow you to look deep into their minds and hearts. At the same time, they will see into yours. You will be drawn to the one that fits you best. After which, we will perform the bonding ceremony. Parmvar turned the page. The picture on the next page showed the Naga king with a golden sword in one hand and chalice in the other. The young dragon and Naga stood before him ready to bond. Kanvar rubbed a finger across the sword on the page. Is this? Yes, that's the king's sword. The one you were carrying, and unfortunately cut both yourself and Dar-Anadhar with. But how did my father get it? Kanvar asked. You didn't bring it from Stonefountain with the baby. Parmvar chuckled. No. Khalid would never have let me take the sword. I had to hunt it down after the revolt. That took a bit of doing since it had been cast off in a junk heap as useless. The magic will only let those of the royal bloodline use it. But back to the point. The sword is used for the bonding ceremony. Parmvar rubbed his wrinkled face and looked back down at the book. The bond is forged with blood, as you've already found out. A small cut is made on the wrist of the dragon and the Naga. Their blood collected in the chalice. Then the Naga drinks the mixture of both bloods, followed by the dragon doing the same. It is a simple and beautiful ceremony. When you consume the dragon's blood, and he yours, the two of you become mentally and physically bound to each other, your very souls intertwined. And when that happens, you, my young friend, will become very powerful. Even more than you are now. Kanvar's stomach twisted at the thought of drinking dragon blood. No wonder Dar-Anadhar had called him a blood-sucking monster. Parmvar continued his lecture, ignoring Kanvar's discomfort. A fully bonded Naga is capable of many things. Not just hearing the dragon speak. The most obvious power is to be able to read the minds of everyone around you, dragons, lesser and greater, as well as other animals and humans. This is a wondrous thing. Parmvar paused and stared out the window at the setting sun. As if listening with his mind to the thoughts of the frogs calling out to their fellows. Kanvar tried to let his mind follow Parmvar's down into the jungle, but his father's wall still held him prisoner. He wasn't sure how he'd gone into Parmvar's mind at all, except that the old man was so close and his memories so clear and poignant. Parmvar cleared his throat. Yes, a wondrous ability, but also very uncomfortable if you don't know how to block out all those minds from crowding into your own. The first thing a Naga must learn is how to shield his mind, to protect himself from stray thoughts and impulses, to shield himself from others who may try to use their powers to sway him in one way or another. And, of course, for privacy. Though you and your dragon could share every thought, emotion, and physical sensation, you will not want to do that all the time. You need to keep your own personality intact. And there will be things you don't need to share with each other. Some negative emotions, some frivolous thoughts, some intimate moments with loved ones. Kanvar shivered. He hadn't thought about mind reading like that. You see, Kanvar, there are layers of thoughts. And so layers of shields. You will want to create a shield around the most center of you while leaving the language layer open to speak freely with the dragons. The concept of a shield is simple. The practical application takes time to perfect. Don't worry if you aren't perfect at it from the start. So you'll teach me to shield my own mind. Then I can be free of this wall my father created. Kanvar rubbed his head as if that would free him from his father's prison. You are very tired and weak. Normally I would suggest we wait until morning, but we don't have that luxury. You must bond soon. Kanvar nodded. His chest continued to itch, and he shivered. Good, Parmvar said. Now, I need you to let my mind into yours. Don't fight me. Yes, I know it will be uncomfortable. But let me in. Then I can guide your thoughts and show you how to build your shields. Kanvar shuddered, remembering the oily feel of his father pushing into his mind. But he sat still as Parmvar reached out and put a wrinkled hand on his forehead. Though his father's mind had been dark and forceful, Parmvar's mind was not. Kanvar barely felt the feather touch of the old man's consciousness blend into his own.